Okay, this one is for Phil and anybody else who has siblings. It's called Jostle and Braid. My sister says my lemon tree is the ugliest tree she has ever seen. I say not true. It's beautiful. I think of the jostle and braid of my parents' DNA, the small defeats and displacements, how they gave us each other. Two variations out of billions of combinations, we can have these trifling conversations. I love my lemon tree. Some fruit dying on imperfect limbs, some too high for picking, and the pretty ones I can reach. We will never speak of the lemon tree again. We will speak of camisoles and olive oil and some things our parents did right. It's very warm. Okay, I'll try.
I'll bring the mic closer to you.
I seek you in the faces of old men. I seek you in the faces of old men, shout into their ears, scale their craggy cheeks, touch their bald spots, tough, often bumpy. You would be that old, and I would never let you fall. I might not have overlooked your frailties. I might very well have grown impatient with your fumbling, the inadvertent moan when you turned in bed. These old men teach me who you might have become. Some hold my elbow when we walk, say I am still beautiful. We gentle each other, slower to judge. We make slow love. We don't give up easily. I would love you better now than I did. This next is a prose poem. I don't know if that makes any difference when you hear it. It's sort of a box, you know. It's called Lunatics Love Neruda. Two lunatics gave me copies of Pablo Neruda's 20 love poems and a song of despair 20 years ago, inscribed them with tidings straight out of their soiled hearts, signed their names. One swore not to hurt me and branded me with scars of betrayal, which I sometimes pass along. The other scribbled Greek or Hebrew letters across the first 4 pages. Who could tell what from what? Their scattered angles obscuring the truth. He'd walked out of the store without paying for the book. A small crime in context. Should I not be grateful each year swallows the years that have gone before? Time passes otherwise undigested, in tachycardia, in breakout flashbacks. One day, filing like a librarian instead of a fatalist, I come across the 2 books as if one had given birth to the other, their twin presence a plenitude reminding me I'd never read Neruda's love poems. What a morning. To be granted a second chance, to read the master in maturity, unguarded, to be given the gift of pause, to consider the reckless promises humans make in unguarded handwriting, to think of forgiveness beyond hypothesis. Age makes desire manageable. Barely. It is possible to visit Neruda for the first time. It is possible to find a tender translation, to fall into his mercy the way I dropped from the womb into somebody's outstretched arms. I've had kind of a rough year health-wise. And as poets, you know that nothing goes to waste. We write poems. So this is called This Is What the Wound Does. You slow. You live your life on a molecular level, each jewel of pain enhanced like dendrites through the lens of a microscope, the dross of the outside world distanced like neuropathic toes. On those tapered mornings that can be gray as uncarded wool, you pull on your compression stockings, take measure of pulse and weather, and carefully count each pill into its small slot. Sometimes the wind rattles the shutters and you are reminded of the drummers on the beach last summer. Sometimes a letter comes, a knock on the door, a tincture of goodness left on the doorstep. Two people bring salad, napkins, and water. You answer the phone. It's a little like leaving Egypt. If you see a red leaf in summer, you begin singing Christmas carols. How is it then the end of the road recedes as the days grow shorter? Is it the sad drag toward November, the bite at the core of your roses? Forget longing. Consider the charity of heat on your skin. This one is a tribute to my yoga teacher, who very gentle soul. She bends me. She asks, pain? I say yes. She knows the soft willingness of bone, my rod and my staff, my stubborn obelisk. She shifts me, considers my position. She asks, pain? I say no. She explains as if anatomy is the only path, or only a path. She asks, pain? I say yes and no, for what was and what isn't and still is and what will replace it. Oh, this is the poem that Phil photographed last time called Meet My Family. I changed it completely. It's called Meet My Family. There's a lot of references here to my family. This one, okay, Meet My Family. My mother never claimed her bugs. She said they inched up the dumbwaiter from other people's houses. Clung to brown paper bags she brought home from the market. After she died, I found bugs in the flour, too flour dusted for her to see. When she was young, she would have been more iron-fisted. Bearing million-year yokes of survival, bugs drift across my path when I walk, armored like pygmy armadillos. I give them right of way. My friend arranges bugs on her bathroom floor, fantastical hexapods hatched from wire and whimsy. It's Kafka's 130th birthday. Some say he was deranged, but I say he was a prophet. After my husband dies, I visit David in Cambodia. Driving back from Angkor Wat, the bus stops in an unmapped village. People get off to buy fried crickets, munch them like peanuts. My daughter, who cooks wherever she lands, searches for flour in my pantry so she can make a roux. I intervene too late. She lifts the plastic lid. Mom, have you been cooking with this flour? I think she might ask me if I know the name of the President of the United States. See, whenever I mention my mother in a poem, I have to mention my father too, or else. So this one's called The Dream, Inside Out. I've lost the knack to know a dream from the inside out. It fizzled from wind breaching cracks around the windows, moonbeams stabbing through a skylight over my bed. Who puts a skylight over a bed? I mean, people I bought the house from put skylights over my... I let the stars have their way, but one night it's my father who shows up after 35 dreamless years without a shirt, no less. He's schlepping a box the size of a thesaurus of old complaints. I'm waiting for him to tell me one of his salty stories, but instead I'm introducing him to Wanda Coleman, a big woman, a black woman, an explosive powerhouse of a poet, crafting a poetry of largesse in calendar years ungenerous to skin and gender. And he, a volcano of a different sort, a smoker of rough tobaccos, a DNA twist of rage who once calmed down long enough to sing me a lullaby. My anarchist brain hooks him up with Wanda, who holds nothing back. While he hoards his past, stands next to the Magnavox and imitates cantors whose sweetest prayers are laced with dread and existential questions. Bards of anger, irony, doubt, and desire. What a duet they would have sung. He feeding her raunchy jokes, pulling that deep contralto laugh out of her. She wrapping big love into the heart of an arsonist. There was no word for it then to translate from my skin, which bumped under my sweater in the doorway to his office, and he beckoned me in. I stepped closer, such a small step to his compliment, his hand where no one else had been since my mother. Could a cry reach outside? I said no to what I did not understand. I'd barely met my blood, and it seemed a gentle time because it was a wordless time. Since there was no word for it, I told no one why I quit. American Buffalo. They don't have buffalo nickels anymore, do they? He never told me who gave him the buffalo nickel he clung to as the ship that brought him to America eased into its berth. Maybe it was hiding in a box of used clothes his uncle sent his parents. Maybe the thugs who looted their apartment after they were rounded up and sent to the ghetto found it and thought it worthless and threw it away. Maybe it was all the luck he had left after he was freed from the death camp and made his way home. It was all he kept. During long days crossing an ocean, he shoved his European garments out of a porthole window, one by one, arriving with the clothes on his back, holding onto the nickel like a seed. It gives me inspiration. Remember the old black and white B movies? Thieves on the lam at seedy bus stations trying to buy a ticket to anywhere. How much you got? That'll get you to Memphis. So he goes to Memphis. Who's old enough to remember the Palmer method? Handwriting, right. I loved it. This is how the Palmer method led to anarchy. Did I stick out the tip of my tongue? Earnest first grader shaping A's, B's, those final T's I still use, swirling loops and bows meant to loosen the wrist without straying outside the lines. Too young to be called vain, my handwriting grew distinctive and pretty with daily practice. how this passion propelled me towards sudden eruptions, figments scribbled down by hand, quick and cursive on scraps of unlined paper, on the backs of envelopes, wayward, spellbound, reckless, not the disciplined way I bite my tongue, sign my Social Security checks. You're supposed to laugh. Thank you. I don't know how many of you have been watching the Roosevelt saga on television. I know you haven't, but I wrote this poem way before that. But
Before Teddy?
Before. I wrote an essay about Teddy when I was in 7th grade, and I got a medal, which I still have. Really made my blouse dirty. I used to wear it. But I got to see his house in Manhattan. I didn't know all those things about him, though. This is called Kneeling and Falling. Has my mother fallen to her knees? Memory is never enough. I believe her head's nearly touching the radio. I'm old enough to know Roosevelt's voice. I can hear the dusk of war in his grief and see my mother's hand is at her throat. She tells me years later, no matter whose war, the Jews will be on the losing end. Jews are forbidden to kneel to anyone, not even God. Only on the Day of Atonement, the cantor falls prostrate, humbled for all of us. And I, in the dazzling cathedral where Laurie got married, couldn't fold to the kneeling bench at my feet. Keening without consciousness, my father dropped as if he'd been struck when my mother died. And slowly, my sister and I raised him up. Sometimes in yoga, when I double over into the child's pose, knees and elbows tucked under, I could be that girl sunk down next to my young mother, and it looks a lot like prayer. This next poem came out of an idea that my friend Ann Buxey had about shoes. Remember you did the shoe thing? It's called Shoe Confessions. If only Neruda had glorified pumps instead of cucumbers. If Keats had immortalized one pair of wedgies, I would not need to dredge memory for metaphor. My baby shoes, never bronzed, are history. I turned 13. My mother bought me the shoes I loved best, some dark, nappy green fabric, cinnamon leather trim. She gave me grassland and ground. I grew tall and taller, bobbled on stiletto heels. Some saw my eyes, some looked below my knees. A man fell in love with my notorious instep. A man stroked my boots while we watched Tosca. I danced in red shoes, left them on a doorstep in Calcutta, aroused a foot fetishist passing by. My husband, a voyager, wanted to be American, ate fried Spam, left me his collection of blue suede shoes. Humming. How did that get here? Well, since Phil mentioned it, I know you'd all want to hear it again. I tend to hum in supermarkets. Actually, I hum everywhere. I have a friend who won't sit next to me at the Philharmonic. My daughter hears me 2 aisles away. She asks me whether I know the market's song. She's being sarcastic. I thought by now she'd outgrown her unwillingness to be seen with me. But she makes me question what I'm doing. Am I praising or praying, Earth's syncopation back to itself, scoping its music until the hum becomes a hymn sung in layers like the ohms in the throats of Tibetan monks. The other day, I listened to a mass for 4 voices in a Gothic church. Because they sang a cappella, I became the organ and the chimes. I was the wooden pews worn to satin. I, the melancholy saints. I, the flames, the shadows. I, the coins. I was the supplication. Last night I heard a rabbi sing a song, sing a word so softly. It was sister to a hum, and the word ruach was the word for spirit and the word for wind. To those who have brought my humming to my attention, who understand that sometimes my hum is a whistle in the dark, and sometimes it is grieving, I give thanks. You have helped me know how one sound sets another in motion, how thunder and gunshots are different tollings, and why this earth is always shaking, though I must be honest, you haven't quite shown me the source of that final quake, the one for which I seem to be rehearsing. We done?
You have another poem at least.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep going.
Keep going. I was watching I guess an interview with Louise Gluck, and she said something about not going back to her old poems. And I thought, I always go back to my old poems. And I'm going to read some of my old poems. Very, 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 very old. It's not that old. I'm going to read the one I always read at the end, but it's not going to be the end this time. American Beauty. I was staring out the window across the lawn when my daughter told me on the phone her newborn son's face is asymmetrical. I said everyone's face is asymmetrical, to protect me from fear that the 2 sides were more than misarranged. The fruitless mulberry is lopsided from this distance. Every bush is bare somewhere. As leaves fall and are replaced, there's always shade in the wrong places, stunting the oranges, making us want to fix things up with fertilizer or prayer. Clarabelle Alegria said her asymmetrical face made her a poet. One side could fly, one held the earth. Even at birth, we enter unruly, hearing the ragged scream when we are torn. Since that call my grandson and I have met, he sings aloud exultation to me in infant tongues. His fists beat out his first rhythms. When he laughs, one cheek is round and smooth with mirth, but it is the other that draws me, a flawed reflection of family lore, faulty histories from Eastern ghettos to the Middle East, rabbis and bureaucrats, gamblers and schleppers. Or maybe we were truly blessed, meshed by some wayward wind with wabi-sabi, the Japanese aesthetic, that looks close at the commonplace and loves what is bruised by chance or misshapen by use. Maybe it is from this distance my grandson's face blossoms into perfect beauty. One more. My very, very, very favorite and oldest. I went to the ball. Remember that one? I went to the ball and I wore a red dress, a thin silk sheath that wrapped my body like a Bing cherry. You couldn't stop staring. Bought me a beer, spilled it. Your young face was so red, wiping wet beer from my thighs. You promised to buy me a new dress. We danced and we danced till we married. I hung my red dress in the hall closet. We stayed home and had a baby, the sweet grape of our love. Showed her to our friends. My mother tied red ribbons to her carriage to protect her from the evil eye. One day I came home and my red dress was gone. You gave it to Cousin Kay. She lived across the street, this brassy blonde. I, no longer slim or cherry, switched to earth tones, quit dancing, cursed my blood, waited years to know you could not strip that second skin away. Red silk still hangs secretly in me, a small brush fire on the edge of a civilized city where we meet again, faces shielded by masks, bodies concealed under animal skins, still red, still wet.
Thank you.